All right, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi isanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here we are back, session number 2 of Bidayatul Abid wa Kifayatul Zahid by the great Imam al-Ba'li rahimahullah ta'ala. We're going to jump right into where we left off in the chapter of wudu. He says, وَالْوُضُوءُ اسْتِعْمَالُ مَاءٍ طَهُورٍ في الأعضاء الأربعة على صفة مخصوصة والتسمية واجبة فيه وفي غسل وتيمم وغسل يدي قائم من نوم ليل ناقض لوضوء وغسل ميت ويجب غسل يدي القائم من نوم الليل ثلاثا بنية وتسمية. Okay, so basically here we're talking about wudu. All right? Al-wudu'u isti'malu ma'in tahurin. It's the application of tahur, water. And we've talked about in the previous lesson the different categories of the water. We had what? Tahur, and then there was tahir, and then there was najis. And which one is the one we're using for purification? Tahur. And the one we're using for cooking or cleaning or drinking, you can use tahur or tahir. And then, of course, we're not going to use najis unless it's a dire emergency. Okay? So that's what we have here, learned about the waters. Now we're learning what we're doing with the water. We're going to make wudu. Isti'malu ma'in tahurin fil a'da'il arba'ati. On the 4 designated body parts. And those are mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions what they call ayatul wudu, which is referring to the face, the hands, the head, and the feet. And this is ala sifatin makhsusa. It's a specific manner. Okay, there's a specific legislated manner in which this is to be done, and we're going to get into that, a little bit of that shortly, inshallah ta'ala. He goes on and he says, وَالتَّسْمِيَةُ وَاجِبَةٌ فِي. This is mentioning Allah's name. That is to say, Bismillah is obligatory in wudu. وَفِي غُسْلٍ. Also when you make a ghusl. For tayammum, he says, وَغَسْلِ يَدَيْ قَائِمٍ مِّن نَوْمِ لَيْلٍ نَاقِضٍ لِوُضُوءٍ. Also, to say Bismillah is obligatory for washing the hands after waking from a night's sleep that invalidates wudu. And وَغَسْلِ مَيِّتٍ. And that is also to wash. It's obligatory to say the Basmala when washing the deceased. So in these acts that he points out, these 5 acts, if you will, the obligation of to say the Basmala, Bismillah, is an obligation. However, it's waived if a person omits it out of forgetfulness or ignorantly. They didn't say it. They didn't know any better. In this case, what we're saying is they're not held accountable and the act will remain valid. In the event that you remember, then you should say it. Some say you should say it and move on. Some say you should say it and start over. Okay? In the case of ritual slaughter, the cat, the tasmiyah is only excused in cases of forgetfulness, but not ignorance. Someone didn't know, you can't eat it. The basmala, when you slaughter an animal, has to be said. So you have to consider the types of food that you're consuming, the meats, and where it's being slaughtered and processed. Okay? And we live in a scenario where most of the meat that's being processed, they're not saying that. And more than likely, they're not even slaughtering the animal in the proper method anyway. Nowadays, a lot of that is mechanized. And especially when it comes to the larger animals, they're not even using a blade to slaughter it. Most of the time, it's either some electrical shock or a bolt to the head to kill the animal first, and then they'll carry on processing it after that. And if that's how the meat is processed, it's considered mayta. It's a carcass. It's not a slaughtered animal. It can't be consumed in that case. Okay? And of course, the details we can save for another time, going over the precise method of how animals are to be slaughtered. But this is one of the things that has to be remembered that is associated with the basmala and its obligatory nature. Okay, so in slaughtering a ritual slaughter of an animal, it can be foregone if it's forgotten, but not out of ignorance. The other thing that the Imam mentions, Al-Ba'li, he says, when sending a hunting tool, or like using a weapon to hunt with, either you're sending a trained dog or you're shooting an arrow or a bullet from a gun in order to strike the prey, the tasmiyah is never excused. It must be deliberately uttered at the moment of dispatch or shooting, or else the game is unlawful to eat. Unexcusable. Okay? He says it's obligatory to wash both hands 3 times when waking from a night's sleep, after making an intention, mentioning Allah's name. It's obligatory to wash both hands. Here, وَيَجِبُ غسل يدي القائم من نوم الليل ثلاثا بنية وتسمية. It's obligatory to wash both hands 3 times when waking from a night's sleep. We're moving on to another issue, by the way, after making an intention and mentioning Allah's name. So here we covered when you say the basmala. Now he's talking about the obligatory nature of washing your hands 3 times if you've arose from a sleep. You woken from a sleep that's invalidated your wudu. And this is something that is done as an act of pure devotion. Meaning, we don't know the reasoning behind it. It's just done because it was reported that way. And there are numerous things within our legal code that are done as acts of pure devotion, and therefore you can't use them in order to make some type of analysis or comparison to other things. Okay? So this issue of washing the hands 3 times when waking from a night's sleep, this is considered ta'abbudi. It's something that is purely devotional in nature. You make an intention and you mention Allah's name. He says, وَالشُّرُوطُ الْوُضُوءِ ثَمَانِيَةٌ انْقِطَاعُ مَا يُوجِبُهُ وَالنِّيَّةُ وَهِيَ شَرْطٌ لِكُلِّ طَهَارَةٍ شَرْعِيَّةٍ غَيْرَ إِزَالَةِ خَبَثٍ وَنَحْوِهَا وَالْإِسْلَامُ وَالْعَقْلُ وَالتَّمْيِيزُ وَالْمَاءُ الطَّهُورُ الْمُبَاحُ وَإِزَالَةُ مَا يَمْنَعُ وُصُولَهُ وَالِاسْتِنْجَاءُ. So there are 8 prerequisites of wudu. 8 things like requirements, conditions. And this applies not only to the obligatory wudu, but also to the recommended wudu, non-obligatory wudu. So these things have to be fulfilled. The first is cessation of what obligates it. This is inqita'u ma yujibu. So whatever obliges you to make wudu has to have come to an end, like menstrual cycle or postpartum bleeding. Okay? Those things have to have come to an end in order for you now to be able to make a valid wudu, right? If you're making a wudu while you're still on your menstrual cycle, even though we understand that you have to make a ghusl as well, but whatever obligates a ghusl obligates a wudu. In theory. So if you're on your menstrual cycle, you can't make wudu, you can't make ghusl. If you're experiencing postpartum bleeding, same thing. That has to come to an end completely before you can begin to embark upon the process of ritual purification. The next one, he says, an-niyyah, which is the intention. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the definition of an-niyyah when we get to the section on prayer. Niyyah is a condition for every ritual purification except the removal of khabath and what's like the removal of khabath. And we understand there's a hadith and there's a khabath. The hadith is a state of being which obliges you to make wudu or ghusl. There's al-hadith al-asghar and there's al-hadith al-akbar, either the minor or the major state of being. And then there's an actual khabath, which is a material form of filth. And so removing that khabath, that filth, doesn't require an intention, like washing away impurities. And the intention is not required because they consider removal of khabath to be min qabil at-turuk. These are like abstentions, things that you stay away from, things that are like you remove or you get rid of. And so the act of simply doing it will suffice legally. It doesn't have to be intended. It's just done. If there's some type of khabath and rain comes, you're not intending anything. Rain comes and washes it away, right? And then problem solved. It's all good, okay? But for like wudu, if you went to the if you jumped in the shower if you had to take a ghusl, for example, and you jumped in the shower without the intention, everything happened that needed to happen. You got everything wet, all the stuff was done, but the intention wasn't there, then it's not sufficient for ghusl. The intention has to be there, okay? So here, this is an exception for that process of purification, and when it comes to the intention, is that izalatul khabath, removal of these impurities, doesn't require an intention. And we should also understand that, as agreed upon by the scholars, there's no reward unless there is an intention behind it. There's no reward unless there's an active intention, and this is by consensus. All right? The next condition, he says, is wal-Islam, meaning you're Muslim. Al-aqlu follows that. You have sound mind, you're sane. Discernment here. Discernment is defined in the school of the Hanabila as 7 years of age, according to the Hijra calendar, by the way. 7 years of age, you've reached tamyiz. Discernment, often also defined by others as an age by which you can distinguish between things. This is wudu, this is washing up. This is jumping in the bath or playing with water, this is ghusl. You know the difference between those things. But in the madhab, they define it as 7 years of age and beyond. Okay? After that is permissible tahur, water, mubah. We talked about the nature of things being permissible for wudu. So you couldn't utilize stolen water for wudu or misappropriated water for wudu. You have to use permissible water. Tahur, water again. The removal of anything that prevents its contact. That's the next prerequisite is izadatu ma yamna'u usulahu. It prevents contact. So if you have something on the limbs that must be washed, that prevents the water from reaching the limb, the part of the body like wax, if you had like a thick amount of mud, if you had paint or a thick amount of fat or grease on the skin that would prevent the water from reaching the skin or the fingernails, like for women that wear finger paints, polish. They wear fingernail polish. When you put a coat of enamel on the fingernail, it is thick enough such that it would prevent water from getting to the fingernail. And the fingernails are a part of the hand. The hand is an obligatory part that has to be washed. The entire hand, including the fingernails, which means you can't make wudu with fingernail polish or toenail polish. That stuff has to be removed. Okay? A stain is different. A stain is different because the stain is not preventing water from reaching the skin. So if you had like hinna on there, which is popular in the Muslim world, darkening the skin by a stain, the actual matter that goes on there stains the skin and then it's removed. Okay? That's a different story altogether. If there's a stain on the skin, it doesn't prevent water from touching the skin. Okay? It's just getting on the skin. It's not, that stain on the skin is not preventing the water from reaching. All right? So we have to be mindful of these particulars. If you have a minute amount of something there, minor amount that's there, like a speck or two or a drop, then that can be overlooked. But you should do your best to remove the bulk of these types of materials that could prevent water from reaching the skin. And then the last thing he mentions is al-istinja, which we've discussed previously, why you would need to make istinja, or istijmar, right? Either using water to clean yourself or using a solid like tissue or paper. Goes on and he says, وَفُرُوضُهُ سِتَّةٌ. These are the 6 furud. These are like the obligations, if you will, or the pillars of wudu. The first one is غَسْلُ الْوَجْهِ وَمِنْهُ فَمٌ وَأَنْفٌ وَغَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ مَعَ الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ وَمَسْحُ الرَّأْسِ كُلِّهِ وَمِنْهُ الْأُذُنَانِ وَغَسْلُ الرِّجْلَيْنِ مَعَ الْكَعْبَيْنِ وَتَرْتِيبٌ وَمُوَالَاتٌ وَيَسْقُطَانِ مَعَ غُسْلٍ. Okay, so here, the 6 obligations, the furud, Basically what we're talking about is if you forget them, there's blame and there's sin on you. Whereas if you perform them, there's a reward for it. That's what we're talking about, these obligations. They include washing the face, as he says, which includes the mouth and the nose. These fall within the facial boundaries. The face, by the way, is from the hairline to the chin and from ear to ear. That's the face, this entire region. From the hairline, or what would be the hairline in the event that the hairline's receded, you know? I don't got to go like way back here. Yeah, I just where it was when I was like, yeah, the original hairline. Yeah. You don't just keep wiping back as it starts to, as you get older and that might not be your thing genetically. If it is, then you just got to work with it the way it happens. Okay? Yeah, so where your hairline would normally be for my brothers out there, from the hairline into the chin, and then from ear to ear on either side. So you have to wash that entire spot, and that entire face. So you have to be careful when you're washing your face. It's not just a haphazard kind of just getting the bulk of it, but the entirety of it is washed when making wudu. As he says, includes the mouth and the nose. That's why we make al-madmada wal-istinshaq. That's what they're called in Arabic, is to rinse the mouth and to rinse the inside of the nose. And Imam al-Ba'di, he says that it's valid for you to consider these obligations in and of themselves if you wanted to. If you wanted to say, no, there were more than 6 furud, there was 8 because you could add these to them. If you wanted to, then that's valid to call it fardul wudu. And so rinsing the mouth, in which the word indicates moving water in the mouth, not just putting it in and letting it fall out. Putting water in and just letting it fall. No, it has to be like kind of a gargling of sorts. And then putting water in the nose, enough that it goes inside of the nostrils, and then exhaling that water back out. Washing the hands, he says, includes the elbows. So the hands here, al-yadayn, the hands is the way it's translated, hand. But al-yad is more than just the hand, the palm, and the back of the palm, but it includes almost like the arm, if you will. And then the mirfaq is the elbow. So when you're washing from the tip of your fingers down and including the elbow, right? So the entire portion has to be washed, not up to the elbow, but to and including the elbow has to be washed during wudu. Right? Not from the wrist to your elbow, but from your entire hand to your elbow, including the elbow. Wiping the entire head, and that includes the ears. It's obligatory to wipe the ears as part of the head. Again, and the head is defined by where the hairline would normally start until it would normally end at the nape of the neck. Okay? So you would wipe the entire head, wiping the head here in its entirety, not just a portion thereof or one side, but the entire portion. I'm giving a demonstration here where you would wipe both hands over the head from the hairline until the nape of the neck, and then you would bring the hands back as a second pass, and then you would wash or wipe over the ears by inserting the pointer fingers into the ear and the thumbs behind the lobes of the ears at the bottom and then rotating them upwards. That's how you would clean the ears during wudu. Washing both feet, including the ankles. Okay? The ankles are also a part of the foot that must be washed. He says, tartibun. Tartib means sequence. And that is you maintain the prescribed order between the limbs. You can't mix that up. Okay? You can't skip and come back. You have to go in the proper sequence as we've described here. When it comes to like washing the left and the right, that's a different story. Washing the mouth first or the nose first, you're still within the same sequence, moving from the major body parts to the other, but going from left and right, that's another thing altogether. Okay? But here we want to keep the major body parts in sequence. And then he says continuity. Continuity, which is known as muwalah, this means that you do not delay the wudu between limbs such that when you've washed one and then delayed long enough for it to dry before you move on to the next one. Or you've washed part of one and then you've delayed long enough for the other part that has to be washed to dry. Right? The first part's dried and then you move on to the next part. So the continuity here means you can't take a break in your wudu, a long enough break for that part of the body to have dried and then come back. In the event that you've done that, like I start making wudu and then I've got a phone call I have to take, I start talking on the phone. If it's a quick one, hey, how you doing? Okay, I'm on the way. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Hang up the phone. I can continue where I stopped making my wudu. But in the event that I picked up the phone and it's not one of those quick ones, it ends up being quite a long chat. I'm in there for a couple of minutes or more, and in the normal environment and atmosphere, my body parts that were washed now dries. I can't continue where I left, but I have to start fresh. Okay, so this is kind of like a moderate atmosphere that we're talking about here. So these last two, he says, وَتَرْتِيبٌ وَمُوَالَاتٌ وَيَسْقُطَانِ مَعَ غُسْلٍ. These last two, meaning sequence and continuity, both of them are waived in ghusl. When you make a ghusl, different from wudu. Ghusl, you make a ghusl due to a major state of ritual impurity, like janaba, which is from sexual impurity, or menstruation, or postpartum bleeding. Wudu here is subsumed within that. Right? It's a part of that, if you will. It's like umrah is subsumed within the rites of hajj. Umrah, the minor pilgrimage, becomes engulfed within the major pilgrimage. So basically meaning that as long as the entire body is washed with intention, including the limbs required for wudu, the person is purified from both major and minor impurity without the need to separately observe the sequence or immediate continuity of wudu's actions. You're washing the entire body. That's happening all at once. The water is just being poured on the entire body. So it's likely that you're going to break sequence. So this is a ghusl and this is a wudu. This gives you some of the distinguishing qualities of the two, and that these two things, they are foregone for ghusl due to a major state of ritual impurity. And this is a legal principle which is known as indiraj, as I described, like when umrah is included within hajj, etc. The next section, he says, we go on to the next section here about the mashul khuffayn. All right, check this out. He says, يجوز المسح على الخفين ونحوهما بسبعة شروط. It's permitted to wipe over the khufs and the like. وَنَحْوِهِمَا. We're going to talk about what the like is as well. The khuffayn, by the way, we're talking about the leather footwear, like leather socks. Many of us are familiar with khufs today. Those are still available in the marketplace, the Muslim marketplace that is, and are worn, they're worn especially in the winter time. So he says, بِسَبْعَةِ شُرُوطٍ. And this is, there are seven conditions, okay? 7 conditions that have to be met to wipe over them. The first, he says, لُبْسُهُمَا بَعْدَ كَمَالِ طَهَارَةٍ بِمَاءٍ. After that, he says, وَسَتْرُهُمَا لِمَحَلِّ فَرْضٍ وَإِمْكَانُ مَشْيٍ بِهِمَا عُرْفًا وَثُبُوتُهُمَا بِنَفْسِهِمَا وَإِبَاحَتُهُمَا وَطَهَارَةُ عَيْنِهِمَا وَعَدَمُ وَصْفِهِمَا الْبَشَرَةَ. So here you have the first, it is, they are worn after complete purification. That is water-based purification. Okay, so that excludes tayammum. And a complete purification, listen to this, this is an interesting little tidbit here. What this means here is after a complete purification, you've completed it in its entirety. So if one were to insert the right foot, assuming they wash the right foot first, they've washed the right foot, and then they put the khuf on. And then they wash the left foot. And then they put the left khuf on. And then later they wanted to wipe over the khufs. In this situation, they would be required to remove the right khuf and then put it back on. Before, of course, hadith occurred. If they had used the restroom or something, then it's over. It was no option anyway from the beginning. They would have, if they were still in a state of purity from the time that they put their khufs on. In this case, what happened in this scenario is they didn't finish the wudu before they put the khufs on. They put one khuf on and they still hadn't finished wudu. Then they washed the left foot, then they finished wudu, and then they only put one khuf on. So one was put on too early. That's why he says, لُبْسُهُمَا بَعْدَ كَمَالِ طَهَارَةٍ, that you put them on after the complete purification bima'in. Okay, so that would be the scenario that you would run into. So once you've washed, you have to wash both the right and the left foot, and then you can put the khufs on. The right and then the left khuf can be put on after that, and then you'll be able to wipe over them, having completed your purification before wearing them. Okay? The second condition, he says that they cover the area of obligation. And what he's referring to is the area of the foot that is obligatory to be washed during wudu. So what we're talking about is from the tips of the toes up to and including the ankles. So wearing short socks, like no-show socks, or no-show footwear, regardless of their, let's disregard the material they're made of at this point in the discussion. But if you're wearing something like a khuf and it was cut below the ankle, then this is something that's impermissible to wipe over. It has to cover the entire part, which is an obligation to clean or to wash. That means the ankle is included. Covers the entire part, even if the coverage is achieved by binding the socks or the foot gear together so that it can make up the entire area that is to be covered. Binding it or patching it together for the sake of coverage, not for the sake of holding it in place. If you have something that has to be kind of, like it might have a hole in it, and so in order to fix the hole, you kind of bind it together and tie it up, then that can cover. We're not talking about binding it so that it stays on the foot, like something loose. That's another one of the issues that we look at here. The next one he says is the third is that walking in them is customarily possible. Walking in them is customarily possible. So the Hanbali school accepts wiping over footwear of various materials, so long as they are durable enough for regular walking, even if they don't have soles on them. Even if they're not worn with sandals. If they're not leather, the scholars add another quality, which means they have to be thick or dense, safiq. Has to be thick or dense. And they often give the example of felt. Understand, felt is like that heavily woven material. It's like crisscross wool and fibers together. It's a very thick material. Has to be thick and dense. If you look in Masa al-Harb, Harb al-Kirmani, he said, I asked Ishaq, a man has a khuf on one foot and a sock or a jawrab on the other. One is made of leather, one is made of another material. He said, can he wipe over both? He said, yes, if the jawrab or the sock is made of wool or the felt-like material, meaning it's thick, it's heavy. I asked, what if the sock is made of thin cloth? And he replied, no, he may not wipe over it. In Ri'ayat al-Kubra, this was by Ibn Hamdan. We've talked about him before. Ibn Hamdan's Ri'ayat al-Kubra, he states, it must be possible to walk in them. So we talked about the thickness of it. It must be possible to walk in them the distance a traveler typically goes for his needs. Because if continuous walking is not possible in them, then there's no valid need to wipe over them, and the concession doesn't apply. Wiping over the khuf is considered a concession. The baseline is to wash with water. Wiping over the foot gear is a concession. And the concessions are typically associated with difficulty and hardship, like the concession of traveling. So he brings up the traveler here, meaning the person's traveling and now he's going from this place or that to handle his needs. He's got to go here to get some food. He's got to go here to get some lodging. He's back and forth, and he's wearing this foot gear. This foot gear has to be sufficient enough for them to walk here and there. Otherwise, if you can't walk around in them, it's not something that they're going to typically use anyway. There's no concession here to wipe over it. Imam Ahmad, if that's not clear, Imam Ahmad was asked about socks made of cloth, jawrab al-khiraq, and whether wiping over them was permissible. He disliked the use of cloth socks for wiping. And he said in another place, this is found in Al-Mughni, he said, wiping over socks is not valid unless the sock is thick, safiq, one that stands firm on the foot and does not collapse. They're like the khuffayn, the leather socks, meaning that the material is substantial enough that it can be like a leather sock. The companions only wiped over the socks, their socks, because to them, the socks, the jawrab that they used were equivalent to khufs, standing in the place of the khuf on a person's foot and suitable for going out and returning in them. And you'll find that not only did they use the word jawrab, but they use a similar word, jarmuq, which is like almost like a boot made out of wool without a sole on it. It's like a heavy, heavy sock that they would wear, they could wear outside. You could actually walk around in it. All right, so that gives you an idea of some of the description, conditions, as well as the minimum requirements of usage that are to be met in order to wipe over socks when performing wudu. So if you think about those things and apply it to today's modern socks, most of us wear, these modern socks, thin, made of cotton or nylon or whatever the case may be, they don't meet the minimum standard here. They can be used to walk in, but they're typically only durable enough to walk around on carpet or home flooring. You're not actually going to wear them to run errands or for travel, consistent outdoor use. And if you were honest and you said, look, if I got to go to the grocery store, even if I were as an exercise to go out, I got to get in the car, or if I had to walk there, I got to shop around, I got to get back through the parking lot, more than likely what's going to happen? They're going to rip. You're going to get a hole. It's not meant for that. It's not meant to use as a substitute for outdoor foot gear, right? So that's according to the madhab. That's the standard there. The issue is debated. There's no doubt about it. There are those that say, as long as it's considered to be footwear, a sock of any kind, and then you can wipe over it. Okay? And based on that legitimate argument, if you see somebody, if you've adopted the view that no, you can't wipe over cotton socks, like if someone were to ask me, can I wipe over my athletic socks? I would say, do not wipe over your athletic socks. Wash your foot. But if I saw somebody doing it, I wouldn't go and say, your wudu is invalid. Because there's ikhtilaf here. There are scholars that have produced an argument that is seemingly strong, and they're reliant upon that. I personally don't advise that though, however. All right? Because the argument against it seems to be very powerful in describing the requirements of the types of foot gear that you can wipe over. Okay, so that is as it relates to that issue of the socks of various different materials and thicknesses as well as their uses. The next thing he says, the fourth condition is that they remain independently secure. The foot gear has to remain independently secure on the foot, or it can be held up with sandals up to the ankle, but they can't be tied in order to keep them up. So like putting a loose sack over your foot, you could tie it to keep it on there, but without it being tied, it's just going to fall right off. It would sag down and eventually come off your foot. So that is not going to meet the minimum standard here. They have to be independently secure. They have to hold themselves up, basically. They have to be permissible, whatever you're wearing. It can't be stolen footwear. Okay, you can't go stealing things and then wanting to wipe over them. Because remember, the wiping over the khuf is a rukhsa, it's a concession. And concessions are afforded as a mercy to Allah. And someone that's stealing things is not afforded Allah's mercy. Right? So it's invalid to wipe over a stolen sock or khuf or boot or shoe or whatever. Also, depending on the material that you're going to use, like a man couldn't wipe over something made out of silk or that has silk in it. Because we know in Islam men aren't permitted to wear silk. Right? So they wouldn't be allowed to wipe over it. They'd be having the sin for wearing it, and then wiping over it would be invalid. The next part is that it has to be tahir. That means pure. Meaning the material has to be pure. Right? So if you are wearing leather boots, for example, and you were of the view that the leather has to be dhabiha, has to be slaughtered in the proper way for it to be tahir, and you're wearing now leather boots that were not slaughtered in that manner, then you couldn't wipe over it. And we talked about that in the previous class. And there are various different opinions as to whether or not leather becomes pure with tanning. And we understand the mu'tamid, the main authorized view of the madhab, is that it does not. Within the madhab, there's a riwayah. There's another narration which says that it is purified through tanning. But what is obvious in the madhab is that, and what is relied upon is that, tanning does not purify leather that has not been slaughtered from the animal. Okay, so here gives you an example of what this point being tahir. You couldn't have on a snakeskin boot, for example, or alligator skin boots, or having, even worse, pig skin leathers, and wipe over them. Okay, we talked about the issue of using these types of leathers for dry goods. As long as the animal was a permissible animal, then you could use it for dry goods, but wiping over it in this case, no. And they do not reveal the skin. That means that they're thick enough that the foot can't be seen through it. And they often use like a glass slipper or shoe as a description, because you could see the skin color, you could see the full description of the foot. And this may also be the case with those very thin, like nylon socks that are typically worn for work shoes, like your professional dress shoes. You don't wear athletic, you're not rolling up with your Nike socks on, I hope, and you've got shiny tucked shoes, you're wearing a tuxedo and you've got Nike socks. We got to talk about that in a different session altogether if that's how we're rolling. It's either you're wearing the dress socks or you're wearing no socks. At least that's the style today. Right? But these very thin nylon socks, you pull them on and you can see, if you look, you can see the skin. You can see you can start to get the glimpse of the skin's color. You can say, okay, this is definitely it's like it's got a white foot. You can see it enough. So it's too thin to be wiped over. And that's another issue with the socks that we typically wear out. Sometimes they're just absolutely too thin. Forget about the ability to walk on. This is another thing added to that list. Can you walk with them? Some of them are very thin. All right, so once we've accomplished these prerequisites, we've met all of these things, and we can start wiping over the socks or the foot gear. He says, فَيَمْسَحُ مُقِيمٌ وَعَاصٍ بِسَفَرِهِ مِنْ حَدَثٍ بَعْدَ لُبْسٍ يَوْمًا وَلَيْلَةً وَمُسَافِرٌ سَفَرَ قَصْرٍ لَمْ يَعْصِ بِهِ ثَلَاثَةً بِلَيَالِهِنَّ. So here, a resident and a traveler on a sinful journey may wipe after a hadith for 1 day and night. A resident or a traveler on a sinful journey. The resident is the one that's not traveling. We're here or at home. Or we've arrived to a destination we're going to stay beyond 20 prayers. It's like 4 days. We're at our destination that we're going to stay beyond 20 prayers, more than 4 days. We're now a resident in that case. If we're going to stay there for a day or 2 or 3, we're still as if we're traveling. But once we've reached, then our intention is we're going to stay there for 5 days. We're not traveling anymore. We're like residents. So we're going to act according to residents with everything that applies. So as residents, we get to wipe 1 day and 1 night, a full 24 hours basically after a hadith. So that's when the clock starts. It doesn't start when you put the sock on. It starts once you typically would be able to wipe over them, and that's when there's a hadith. So like you put the socks on after making wudu or whatever in the morning, and then you made it all the way to dhuhr prayer, for example. You prayed dhuhr, and then after dhuhr prayer, you had to go to the restroom. You put the socks on at fajr time, and then you made it all the way through dhuhr prayer. Then you use the restroom. When do you start counting the clock for the 24-hour period? After dhuhr prayer, when you went to the restroom. which means you can start wiping there and all the way around until after the next Dhuhr prayer. Right? So you have that night and day, basically that 24-hour period in which you can continue wiping over the socks. And that also goes for a traveler on a sinful journey. And this goes back to the idea that concessions are afforded to those deserving of Allah's mercy. And the sinful journey is not one who is sinning on a journey, but one whose intention for the journey is sinful. Like the intent of travel, the goal of the journey is to commit a sin. Traveling to Vegas. It's not for a work convention either. We're going to put it all on black. Going to go gamble. That's a sinful travel, a sinful journey. Okay? So, however many days it takes you to get there and come back, you're only afforded wiping over the socks for a day and a night. You're not afforded the concession of shortening and combining your prayers. You're not afforded the concession of breaking your fast, etc., etc. Even though travel is one of the major reasons to have a concession, in this case, because you're traveling for sinful purposes, you're not afforded that. If you're traveling for, even if it's just sightseeing or just a vacation, you're permitted. It's not restricted to, I'm just going to go make Hajj or Umrah or go do something righteous. But you're permitted to wipe over the socks. In that case, as he says, a traveler on a journey of shortening, that is, they're traveling the distance which permits shortening the prayers, not sinful in nature, then they may wipe for 3 days and 3 nights. He says, فَلَوْ مَسَحَ فِي سَفَرٍ ثُمَّ أَقَامَ أَوْ فِي حَضَرٍ ثُمَّ سَافَرَ أَوْ شَكَّ فِي ابْتِدَاءِ الْمَسْحِ لَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَى مَسْحِ مُقِيمٍ. So if one wipes while traveling, wipes over the socks, that is, or the foot gear while traveling and then settles, meaning they become a resident before a day and a night ends, or while in residence and then travels before a day and a night has passed, or is uncertain when the wiping began, whether it was before or after starting the journey, then in this case they do not exceed the wiping period of a resident. It's also important to note that the portion in which you wipe on the foot gear is the upper part of the foot, right? You wipe from the upper part of where the toes and the laces of the shoe would be, up to the shin. You don't wipe over the sole of the foot or the heel. You don't wipe over that, and it's not even recommended to wipe over those parts. The only part you wipe over is the top part of the khuf or the footwear. The next section transitions into alternative things which one could wipe over. He says, وَيَجُوزُ الْمَسْحُ عَلَى جَبِيرَةٍ إِنْ كَانَ وَضَعَهَا عَلَى طَهَارَةٍ وَلَمْ تُجَاوِزْ قَدْرَ الْحَاجَةِ وَإِنْ جَاوَزَتْهُ أَوْ كَانَ وَضَعَهَا عَلَى غَيْرِ طَهَارَةٍ وَجَبَ نَزْعُهَا. Okay, so here we're talking about wiping over the cast. It's permitted to wipe over a cast or a bandage or a splint if it was worn after purification. After you've been purified ritually, you can wipe over that cast or that splint, so long as it does not exceed the area of need. مَا لَمْ تُجَاوِزْ قَدْرَ الْحَاجَةِ. قَدْرَ الْحَاجَةِ here, meaning that if you had an injury on your arm, let's use that as an example, the forearm that would be washed, if there was an injury on your arm that required it to be bandaged. Okay? So there's maybe like a laceration or there's a fracture. Let's say there's a fracture. Fractured my arm. And then the doctor's going to come in and they're going to put a cast on the arm to immobilize for it to heal. Now the cast, the location of fracture is going to probably be very small. But the cast is going to extend beyond that. Okay? So whatever is required for that is permitted to be wiped over. Even if it goes beyond the exact location of that type of injury, the doctor says, no, you got to have it up to your wrist, or you got to have it include part of your hand. It has to be immobilized. It has to go up to your, it has to. Then in that case, it's permitted to wipe over that cast. In the event that you had a laceration, there's a cut, okay? And you put a bandage on it. The cut is like on one side of the arm. If you have to wrap around the arm, then it's permitted in that case, if you have to. If you don't have to wrap around and cover the other side of the arm, like there's an adhesive that can be used, then you only use the adhesive part and you can wipe over that. If there's a laceration and you just go crazy with the gauze and you're just wrapping the whole arm all the way to your hand because you like the way it feels or looks, I don't know, then that's exceeding qadr al-haja. It exceeds that point. In that case, you couldn't wipe over the excess part, and there'll be something that we could look at how to deal with that here shortly. Okay? So what you do in this case is you're to wash the healthy parts of the body when making wudu. The body parts that are required, you're washing them, and wiping over the cast or the bandage with water without making tayammum, just like you would wipe over the footgear. So it's similar to wiping over the khufs. Okay? You begin making wudu, and when you get to that part of the arm, you just wipe over it. In this case, on the arm, you just wipe over it. Wipe over the cast or wipe over the bandage. Right? You already made wudu before, so you're good. You wipe over it, and you continue, you move on. And this is actually more deserving than wiping over the khufs. To do this, to wipe over the cast or the splint is more deserving of a case for concession because there's a real hardship here, and that's an injury. As opposed to just the difficulty of, taking the socks and shoes off to make wudu. That's rather easy to do in most cases, but it can be cumbersome at times, there's no doubt about it. So we've been afforded a concession, so wiping over a cast or a bandage of this nature is even more worthy of such a concession. He says, if it exceeds, وَإِن جَاوَزَتْهُ أَوْ كَانَ وَضَعَهَا عَلَى غَيْرِ طَهَارَةٍ. So there's two cases here. If that bandage or splint or cast exceeds the necessary area, or it was put on without tahara, then it's an obligation to remove it. You have to take it off to make wudu, because you're obliged to wash the limb. And you're not afforded the wiping over that cast or that bandage because it wasn't put on with tahara. He says, فَإِنْ خَافَ ضَرَرًا. If harm is feared as a result of removing it, tayammum is made. تَيَمَّمَ مَعَ مَسْحِ مَوْضُوعَةٍ عَلَى الطَّهَارَةِ مجاوزة محل الحاجة وإن ظهر بعض محل فرض أو حصل ما يوجب الغسل أو انتقضت المدة بطل الوضوء. So here, to conclude the issue about wiping over the cast or the splint, etc., he says if you fear harm in removing that, tayammum is to be made as an obligation, along with wiping over what was worn while in a state of purity and exceeds the area of need. If you don't remove it, here, على طهارة مجاوزة محل الحاجة, says, وإن خاف ضررا تيمم مع مسح موضوعة على طهارة مجاوزة محل الحاجة. Okay, so here we're talking about having worn it without making wudu, or worn it with wudu and there's an excessive amount of the bandage. And you don't want to take it off because you're worried that it will create greater hardship or harm to that wound. So you want to protect your health here in this case. So what do? You're not allowed to wipe over it. So instead of wiping over it, you're going to make tayammum, which is the earth-based purification. And this is obligatory for you to do. And then you would also wipe over what was worn with that while in a state of purity with the excess. So meaning here, the portion that was, even if you had made wudu first and then you have an excess amount of that cast on, you still have to make tayammum. After wiping over that, then you have to deal with the excess portions. And for those excess portions, you have to make tayammum as well. We clear on that? You do, you do, what happens, what the description of this is, you go in order, depending on what you're doing, wudu or ghusl. Remember, there's tartib. Right, so when we get to this portion, then we would make tayammum. Then we continue. Yeah. For that one part, yeah, but you're washing everything that you would normally wash. You're washing everything that's healthy and uncovered. And then when you get to that part, based on whether if it's worn without making wudu or there's an excess on it that you can't remove due to fear, then you're going to wipe over it if it was worn with wudu and then deal with the excess. You're going to make tayammum because it's covering portions that should be washed. So that's going to deal with that particular part of your purification process, and then you move on after that. He says, وَإِنْ ظَهَرَ بَعْضُ مَحَلِّ فَرْضٍ أَوْ حَصَلَ مَا يُوجِبُ الْغُسْلَ أَوْ انْتَقَضَتِ الْمُدَّةِ بَطَلَ الْوُضُوء. So if any part of an obligatory area becomes revealed after a hadith occurs, or the foot, for example, that you're wearing the sock or the foot gear, or a part of the foot is pulled out of that khuf or that footwear, like to the shin part of it, right? So if the footwear was such that there's the foot and then there's the part that goes on the shin, and you pulled the foot out of it into this piece here, either revealing a part of it, either revealing all of it or a part of the foot, or if something necessitating ghusl occurs, like a major state of ritual impurity, or the time expires, we've gone up past our 24 hours as a resident, or our 3 days and 3 nights as a traveler, wudu is invalidated. As is the prayer, if you're praying with that, in that scenario. Okay, so either the time runs out, or a part of the body that you wiped over was exposed. Like in the event that, for example, you took the bandage off. You had the bandage on there, you wiped over it, you had made wudu, etc. And then you're like, doctor said I could take it off. You take it off. Now that's exposed, which means now wudu is broken, is invalidated. And you have to make another wudu. Or like the socks. You had socks, you wiped over the socks. And then you decided, then there was a hadith that occurred, and then you take the socks off. The wudu is invalidated. Or the time expires. That seems to be obvious, because there's a debate between whether if you you wiped over it and then you took them off later after a hadith occurred. After you wiped over the hadith occurred, you wiped over them and then you took them off. There's a debate between whether you still have a tahara or not. The madhab is that once you removed it, it's invalidated, the wudu. Okay? And then the time expiring, of course, means the wudu has been invalidated. Good job. Excellent question. So the jabira, or the cast or the splint, it's not typical to have that on just for 3 days. You could have that on for 6 weeks or more. And the time would expire when it's no longer needed. Yeah. So that could carry on. It could go on for quite some time. And that's based on what the sound medical advice would be. They say, look, you got to keep the cast on for 6 weeks. Then you get 6 weeks. If you follow the instructions, you made wudu first, and then you put it on, then you can wipe over it for those 6 weeks. If you didn't make wudu beforehand, this tayammum is going to be your buddy. And I've personally been in that situation. There's lots of that going on. Yeah. Thinking, man, I would have just told the doctors before they put me to sleep, I need to make wudu. But قدر الله ما شاء فعل. All right, the next section, this is where we're going to wrap up. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Okay. All right, so about the time period. If a person they have a night and a day, they have this cycle that they have this period of time in which they're permitted to wipe over the socks or whatever. It's also permitted in the madhab to wipe over a turban and to wipe over a khimar for a woman. And there's some descriptions as to exactly what type of turban and what type of khimar that they can wipe over. Generally, though, they can wipe over those objects with the same rules here. And the time period, in your case, of somebody, it would depend. If somebody has a time period in which its dhuhr prayer is going to end their time period, what do they do for asr prayer? So in the event that for the entire duration, they never actually broke their wudu from the time that they put them on, not the time that they needed to wipe over them. So for that entire cycle of the day and the night, they were awake, they didn't invalidate their wudu, then them having the socks on is like them not having them on. They're still in a state of purity. They never were obliged to wipe over the socks in the first place. So there's no expiration for a person's tahara. Your tahara, if you've purified yourself, there's no time limit to it. So if you went on a whole day or two, you're just up for whatever reason, then it doesn't expire. But in the event that you did wipe over the socks due to a hadith, the time period begins when the hadith occurred. All right? So let's say after dhuhr, as we did before, you have all the way until after dhuhr to wipe over those socks. Now let's say before dhuhr you made wudu and you wiped over your socks. You're in a state of purification. After dhuhr, the time period expires for you to wipe over the socks. But you don't break your wudu until asr prayers comes and you prayed asr, or you could pray asr. According to the madhab, once the time period expires, batal al-wudu. Even if you didn't go to the bathroom. You prayed dhuhr, you wiped out. Before dhuhr you came, you made wudu, you wiped over your socks. You're like, okay, I'm getting it in. I'm going to wipe over the socks, and then I'm not going to use the bathroom until later in the day so I don't have to wash my feet, or so I don't want to have to take my socks off. I'm just going to hold strong. I'm going to get through the day. I'm going to keep, no. According to the madhab, once the time period expires, everything's done. You start from zero, scratch. Wudu's done, tahara's done, it's finished. So in that instance, even if you didn't need to make wudu before, like I didn't go and use the restroom before that, now that the time has expired, wudu is over, you have to make wudu for the next prayer. You have to take the socks off. You have to wash your feet. You could put them right back on after that and begin another cycle, but that would be the case. All right? Again, that's one of those issues that you're going to find there's some debate surrounding if they can continue on after the time period has expired, but the madhab is clear that once the time is expired, all of that has to reset and you have to make wudu again. All right, the next chapter is an important one. It's nawaqid al-wudu, and this is the invalidators of wudu. He says, nawaqid al-wudu thamaniyatun kharijun min sabilin mutlaqa. So there are 8 invalidators of wudu. The first one that he mentions is excretion of anything from a tract. We're talking about sabil. Sabilain is any substance that exits from either of the 2 private parts. That is, from the front, the urethra or the vagina, or the rear, meaning the anus. And this includes all types of things which exit regardless of their quantity, whether it's a small amount, like a drop, or a large amount, regardless of their frequency, whether it's something that occurs rare, like a stone, or a worm, or what's customarily happening, like urine, or fecal matter. Regardless of their ritual status of purity or not. So whether a child is born from the womb without blood, if you could imagine that, because it came out of the sabil, wudu has been invalidated. Or if it's impure, like urine, which is typical. Right? So it doesn't matter. Basically what they're saying is anything kharij min sabilin mutlaqa, absolute, whatever comes out, even passing wind, and that could be from the back or from the front. Passing wind, movement of air, is something that exits a tract. In all cases, the act of exiting from either passage necessitates renewing wudu. And the rules of purification associated with each case are applied. Because, as we'll come to learn, not everything is managed in the same way. And we've talked about that a little bit with istinja. When are you obliged to make istinja and when you're not? Okay, and we can find much deeper explanations, more extensive explanations, the other more voluminous legal works. He says, وَخُرُوجُ بَوْلٍ أَوْ غَائِطٍ مِنْ بَاقِ الْبَدَنِ قَلَّ أَوْ كَثُرَ أَوْ غَيْرِهِمَا كَقَيْءٍ أَوْ دَمٍ إِنْ فَحُشَ فِي نَفْسِ كُلِّ أَحَدٍ بِحَسَبِهِ. So here is the second category of impurity exiting from other parts of the body, and that would be like discharge of urine or feces from the rest of the body, not from the normal areas. Like if urine or feces were to come out of the other parts of the body, like today, maybe they put a tube in, maybe it come through your nose or through your mouth or something. There's an incision in your body that's extracting those materials. They're coming out of the body, whether it's a little or whether it's a lot, whether it occurs below the stomach or above it, whether the two tracts, they're open and they can pass that, or they're blocked and they're having to pull it out for some reason. Then this would require wudu. Or a discharge of other substances such as vomit or blood. Like if you were to vomit or you were to bleed any part of your body, then it would invalidate the wudu if deemed excessive. He says, "In fahusha fi nafsi kulli ahadin bihasabi." And this is a personal thing. This is judged by your personal. And some say it's judged by what's considered normal, of a normal occurrence. Like, is this a lot of vomit or is this just a little bit? So if it's in an abundant amount, then it's broken your wudu. Like a cut. I got a little cut, like a paper cut. I had a drop or two of blood come out. That's very different from having a real laceration. And then you're bleeding profusely. A little drop of blood or two, it's excusable, right? Otherwise, it would invalidate the wudu. He says, وَزَوَالُ أَقْلٍ إِلَّا يَسِيرَ نَوْمٍ مِنْ قَائِمٍ أَوْ جَالِسٍ. This is loss of consciousness, except like slight dozing while standing up or sitting firm. So this is the third nullifier of wudu. The loss of consciousness, full consciousness, or its veiling, such as, it's called ighma, like fainting. Or there's an onset of insanity that happens when a person loses their faculty. Or what's known as barsan. And this is like a stroke of sorts. It's like you lose control of sudden, you have a sudden like blackout. Or even sleep. The Hanbali, the divine sleep, is a heavy stupor that descends upon the heart and prevents awareness of surrounding things. It's like where you're no longer aware of what's happening. It's different from you sitting there and your eyes are closed. You kind of like, you're just there resting, but you can still hear what's happening. If somebody comes in, the door opens, there's a car passing, you're aware of all that stuff. This is different than the act of sleep, which is when all of that stuff is now lost to you. This kind of sleep, due to its impact on awareness, will nullify your wudu. So the exception is made here with light sleep while standing upright or sitting. Not sitting and leaning, but sitting, fixed. In these postures, the body is typically more tense, number one. Because what we're concerned about is you doing something. Like passing gas or something, right? While you're in these positions, the body is typically more tense. It's less likely for that to happen. And you're also more alert with what's happening with your body, making it very unlikely that something would exit without you noticing. If the person is unsure whether they are asleep, was light or heavy, then the default is that it does not break wudu. Like if you have a doubt. So the doubt would be disregarded here. But light sleep is something that would invalidate the wudu if the person was bowing in ruku'. and they kind of like started to drift off. Or prostrating. They were lying down, leaning, reclining, or sitting with their knees drawn and their arms collapsed around them. You know how typically we see people sitting like that. It's what's called muhtab. This is when you hold your knees up to your chest and you kind of sit hugging your knees. And these are relaxed positions. The body begins to relax in these positions. The tension is diminished and weakened. And so it's very likely that any type of discharge may go unnoticed. And so the ruling is that it nullifies your wudu. The next thing he says, وَغَسْلُ مَيْتٍ أَوْ بَعْضِهِ, washing the deceased or a part of a deceased body. Washing the deceased, whether the person is Muslim or non-Muslim, young, old, male, female, this would invalidate your wudu, and this is min mufradat al-madhab. This is from the unique rulings of the Hanbali school. And every school has their mufradat. Every school has come to some conclusion that the other schools haven't come to. And this is one of the things that the madhab are typically kind of proud of, is that we have mufradat, meaning we're not them, we are our own school. We have our own principles and foundations. Because the Hanabila, a lot of times, they were just like, you're just Shafi'iyya. Because Imam Ahmad was a student of Imam Shafi'i, and a lot of the rulings, they agree with the Shafi'iyya. So they said like, wait, we have mufradat. Like, no, we're not twins. We're unique. We have, our Imam has his own scholarly deductions and conclusions based on the evidence that he had, and was able to understand in such a way. So this is min al-mufradat. So he also says here about washing even a part of the body. And this means a part of the body, you washed it even if it was covered in a garment, like washing a body that had a gown on it or was fully clothed or covered with something, and washing it here with water, not talking about making tayammum for the body, the deceased. That doesn't count as washing, that's tayammum, that's a different thing. And the washer is the one who physically handles the body, turning it over and preparing it. It's not the assistant who might just be pouring water. The one that's there just pouring the water is not considered the washer, so the wudu of that person is still intact. The next part, وَأَكْلُ لَحْمِ إِبِلٍ وَلَوْ نَيِّئًا تَعَبُّدًا فَلَا نَقْضَ بِبَقِيَّةِ أَجْزَائِهِ وَشُرْبِ لَبَنِهَا وَمَرَقِ لَحْمِهَا. He says, eating camel meat, even if raw, as a devotional cause, it is not invalidated by the other parts or by drinking its milk or broth. So this is the fifth category. Eating camel meat invalidates wudu. Even if it's eaten raw or cooked, doesn't matter. As long as you're eating the lahm, the meat part. And this is ta'abbudi, similar to what we discussed before, meaning it's devotional. There's no rationale behind it that we know of. And so reasoning is not applied here. And because of that, they say wudu is not nullified for consuming other parts of the camel, like the liver or the heart, the spleen, the tripe, that's the stomach lining, the fat or similar components of the camel. Nor is it nullified by drinking its milk or drinking the broth of the meat, the lahm. Right? You would cook sometimes boiling the meat. You take the lahm, which is like the muscular tissue. You put it in the water and it makes kind of a stew. Right? You can drink that and it doesn't invalidate your wudu. But if you eat the meat with it, then your wudu is invalidated. And that gives you an idea of what ta'abbudi looks like. You're like, well, why could I drink the maraq? I can drink the soup, but I can't eat the meat. Because the Prophet specifically stated the meat. And we don't understand the reasoning behind meat being an invalidator. You can eat other types of meat. You can eat cow, you can eat chicken, whatever else. None of that's going to invalidate your wudu. But here, it's just the camel. So there's something very precise and particular about it as an act of devotion. And so therefore, anything else that has to do with the camel, if it's consumed, considering this ruling, your wudu would be intact. Stated in Sharh Muntaha, because the authentic reports mention only the meat and the ruling is not rationally discernible, it's غير معقول المعنى, the ruling must be restricted to what the text explicitly mentioned. Okay? Sharh Muntaha. This is one of the primary fundamental texts of the madhab. This is like one of the primary references. You're being introduced here by Imam al-Ba'li. وَمَسْحُ فَرْجِ آدَمِيٍّ مُتَّصِلٍ أَوْ حَلَقَةِ دُبَرِهِ وَلَوْ مَيْتًا بِيَدِهِ. The next part is touching a connected human sex organ or anus, even if deceased, with one's hand. This is the sixth nullifier of wudu, is to touch the private part, farj, of a human being. Whether it is the penis of a male or the vagina of a female, provided it is attached to the body, not detached or severed. If it's detached, it loses its sanctity. It's a different case altogether. This also includes halaqat ad-dubar. That's the anus. Not talking about like the surrounding area, okay, of a human being. Even if the person touched is deceased. And there's no distinction in the ruling between touching your own body or that of another. Right? So meaning if you touch your own parts, then with your hand, that's the important part, with your hand, all right, let's be specific, then wudu has been invalidated. And the phrase biyadihi, with his hand, relates to the act of touching, meaning this is the nullifying quality here, that the hand comes in contact with those defined body parts. Even if it's a za'ida, an extra digit, like you have an extra finger. How many fingers do you have? 5. You had to think about it for a second, I noticed. Ala barakatillah. You're like, wait a minute. Yeah, still 5. But in the event that you had a 6th finger, which would not be normal, no, on one hand, not just yours, not like this. He's like, I got 6 fingers, homie, what are you talking about? Be specific, right? We're being specific. No, if you had another finger go out the side of your hand, that happens, by the way. Typically, they cut those off. Right? That's a ruling in and of itself. You should cut it off or leave it. Right? But typically here, the culture is you have that removed. Yeah. Yeah. The actual hand here. I'm going to talk about that. This is this part of the hand. Not the forearm or the elbow. Here the hand, because they talk about the palm, the back of the hand, and the sides. All of that is included, even if it's an extra appendage, which would not be a normal part of an expected part of the human body. Even if that extra appendage or digit touched it, then your wudu would be invalidated. This does not apply to touching with a fingernail. In this case, because the fingernails are considered things that are lost. Like the fingernail is something that detaches from the body. Or any other part of the body, like the forearm. So if you were to touch touch your private part with your forearm, then that would invalidate wudu, just with the hand. Likewise, there's no difference between using the palm, the back of the hand, or the side of the hand, since every part of the hand shares the ruling of the palm in this matter. It's also a condition that the touching be done without a barrier. Right? So it's skin-to-skin contact, not over your clothes or something. Like if you're making an adjustment or something, you're fine. If the private part is touched through a covering, wudu is not invalidated. He says, لا مسه الخصيتين ولا محل فرج البائن. So this excludes the testicles or the site of a detached sex organ. So wudu is not invalidated if you were to touch those areas of the body. So like if the organ was severed for some reason and it's not there, just the location of it's not going to invalidate your wudu. The next part he says, وَلَمْسُ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى الْآخَرَ لِشَهْوَةٍ بِلَا حَائِلٍ وَلَوْ بِزَائِدٍ لِزَائِدٍ. Here it is touching the opposite gender with desire and no barrier, even if one extra appendage touches another. And this is the 7th nullifier of wudu. That a male touches a female or a female touches a male such that the bare skin of one touches the other with desire. There's shahwa. Not like a non-desirous touch, like a shaking of the hand. We're talking about between genders, so we're referring to with a mahram. And in the event that it was a non-mahram person, that's another ruling altogether, but the wudu wouldn't be invalidated here. So like if you went in and you kissed your wife on the cheek or on the lips, and it was just like a traditional, hello, how are you doing? It's not a desire, sensuous act. You gave them a hug, etc. You sat next to them, wrapped your arm around them. That's not going to invalidate the wudu. What we're talking about here is a desirous touch, bishahwa. The wudu must be renewed. This applies even if the touch is to non-standard body parts, as he mentions, like an extra finger or toe. So long as it's attached to the body, it's treated like a normal part of the body. And even if the person touched is deceased or an old woman or unlawful to marry or a young girl who is desirable, a young girl, that means she's 7 years or older. This is where they consider desire to begin in females. Like for a male to have desire, the minimum age for them to actually consider that as like what within the realm of normal desirability is that she's 7. Anything younger than that, they don't look at that. Even if, God forbid, there's some thing happening up here that causes you to look at a child of that age with desire, they're not going to consider that in this case because that's outside of the framework of normal, right? And then touching those that I've just highlighted with desire invalidates wudu. Doesn't matter. Age, deceased or living, unlawful, or like unlawful to marry, meaning a mahram, like if you've touched a mahram with desire, like your cousin, for example. I'm sorry, not your cousin, like your sister, for example, or your auntie. If you had some desire there, because your cousin would be a non-mahram for you, so you had come in contact with your cousin or any other strange woman with desire, then in that case your wudu would be invalidated. Okay, touching a beardless youth, he says, is also included in this. A boy past puberty but has no facial hair. It does not break the wudu. Women touching other women or men touching other men with desire, it doesn't invalidate the wudu. It's like we're not even going to acknowledge that. No, thank you. Let's move on. We're not going to put that into effect here. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Contact with non-skin surfaces like teeth, fingernails, or hair has no effect on wudu, even if done with shahwa, or touching someone with those, like your own, like you rub your hair on them, like in a sensual manner. I don't know. It's skin-to-skin contact. So if you brushed your hair on somebody or your fingernail on somebody, then that wouldn't break your wudu, even if it was done sensually. And then the last thing to note is that the person being touched, their wudu is not impacted. It's the only one that's actively touching the other person. Okay? The one that's being touched, their wudu is not going to be invalidated. Even if it's their private part that's being touched. Even if when they're touched, they experience some desire as a result of that, they're not actively involved in that process, then their wudu is not invalidated. The ruling is specific to the one who's initiating the touch. Now, if they then intend backwards, I'm going to meet you in this little session, then, yeah. The last one is ridda, he says, وَلِيَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ, is apostasy, because with apostasy, all is lost. May Allah protect us from that. The last line he says, وَكُلُّ مَا أَوْجَبَ غُسْلًا أَوْجَبَ وُضُوءًا غَيْرَ مَوْتٍ فَإِنَّهُ يُوجِبُ الْغُسْلَ لَا الْوُضُوءَ بَلْ يُسَنْ. Everything that requires ghusl, such as contact of the circumcised parts, he means intimate contact with one another, the moment of orgasmic fluid, the movement of orgasmic fluid, even if it is not expressed from the body completely, or the acceptance of Islam. And a person accepts Islam, they were a non-Muslim, or someone that apostated and they become back to Islam, they're required to make a ghusl. It also requires wudu. Except for the case of death. Death requires ghusl alone. As we know, when a person dies, they are obliged to have a ghusl performed for them. And among that, they can make a wudu as well, as is recommended for the person that's passed away. So, وَلَا نَقْضَ بِكَلَامٍ مُحَرَّمٍ وَلَا بِإِزَالَةِ شَعْرٍ وَظُفْرٍ وَنَحْوِهِمَا. Wudu is not nullified by impermissible speech. It's not nullified even by eating something impermissible or najis. It's not nullified by the removal of hair or nails or the like. وَمَنْ شَكَّ فِي طَهَارَةٍ أَوْ حَدَثٍ وَلَوْ فِي غَيْرِ صَلَاةٍ بَنَى عَلَى يَقِينِهِ. It says, whoever doubts purification or the occurrence of a hadith, even outside of prayer. So it's not exclusive to just being in prayer. While you're praying and you start thinking, oh, did I make wudu? You have a doubt. They're to follow what they are certain of. And this highlights a legal principle of certainty not being removed by doubt. And that's something that we can talk about in greater detail later. This is where we're going to wrap up. Jazakallah khair for your attentive listening, your attendance and your patience. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.